There are moments in international politics when events in different capitals, driven by different motives and timelines, suddenly collide into a single, revealing picture. One such moment is unfolding now. On one side is a battlefield decision by Ukraine that has challenged long-standing assumptions about Russia's military power and strategic depth. On the other is the re-emergence of Donald Trump as a central figure in U.S. politics, reshaping debates about American commitments abroad and the future of Western support for Ukraine. These two developments are not formally coordinated, yet together they are unsettling a war that Vladimir Putin once believed he could manage through endurance, control, and predictability. This matters now because the war in Ukraine has entered a phase where political signals may be as consequential as military ones. By the end of this analysis, viewers will understand how Ukraine's recent actions have disrupted Russia's strategic calculus, how Trump's political posture reverberates far beyond the United States, and why the intersection of these forces is testing the foundations of Putin's war effort. To grasp the significance of this moment, it is essential to step back and understand the broader context. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 was framed by the Kremlin as a limited operation designed to secure Russia's interests and reshape the post-Cold War security order in Europe. Instead, it became the largest land war on the continent in decades. Early Russian advances stalled, Ukrainian resistance hardened, and the conflict evolved into a prolonged struggle defined by attrition, industrial capacity, and political will. Throughout this period, Russia relied on a combination of military pressure, energy leverage, and nuclear signaling to deter deeper Western involvement. Ukraine, meanwhile, depended on international assistance, domestic mobilization, and adaptive tactics to survive and gradually regain initiative. The United States has played a central role in this dynamic. Under President Joe Biden, Washington positioned itself as Ukraine's leading supporter, providing military aid, intelligence sharing, and diplomatic backing while carefully avoiding direct combat involvement. This approach was shaped by two parallel goals: enabling Ukraine to defend itself and preventing escalation into a broader NATO-Russia conflict. European allies, though sometimes divided over pace and scale, broadly aligned with this framework. Russia, for its part, calculated that Western unity would eventually fracture under economic strain, political change, and war fatigue. Donald Trump's return to the political spotlight complicates this picture. As a former president and current political contender, Trump brings with him a record of skepticism toward NATO, transactional views of alliances, and ambiguous statements about Ukraine. During his presidency, Trump questioned the value of long-standing security commitments and pressed allies to increase defense spending. Since leaving office, he has suggested that the war in Ukraine could be ended quickly through negotiation, without clearly explaining how or on whose terms. These statements resonate with parts of the American electorate weary of foreign entanglements, and they inject uncertainty into the future of U.S. policy. Against this political backdrop, Ukraine has pursued a military strategy that increasingly emphasizes initiative rather than reaction. In the early stages of the war, Ukrainian forces focused on defending territory and repelling advances. Over time, as capabilities expanded, Ukraine began to target Russian logistics, command structures, and symbolic assets. These actions were not only about immediate battlefield gains, but about altering perceptions of what was possible. Each successful strike beyond the front lines chipped away at the notion that Russia's rear areas were secure. The specific gambit that has drawn global attention involved a Ukrainian operation that reached deep into Russian-controlled or Russian-claimed space. Details remain contested, and responsible analysis requires caution. What is verified is that Ukraine conducted a long-range strike against a high-value target associated with Russia's military infrastructure. Ukrainian officials framed the action as a defensive necessity, aimed at reducing Russia's ability to launch attacks. Russian authorities acknowledged an incident, but minimized its significance, emphasizing continuity and resilience. Independent analysts using satellite imagery and open-source intelligence identified damage consistent with a serious disruption. Chronologically, the episode unfolded quietly. Initial reports were fragmentary, often emerging from local sources or brief official statements. There was no immediate spectacle, no dramatic announcement. Only later did the broader implications become clear, as analysts connected the dots between the location, the type of infrastructure involved, and the timing. What made this strike different was not only its technical execution, but its strategic message. Ukraine demonstrated that it could penetrate layers of defense Russia had long presented as robust and deterrent. This matters because Russia's war effort relies more than manpower and firepower. It depends on confidence, both domestically and internationally, that the state retains control. High-value systems serve a dual purpose. They provide military capability and symbolize technological and strategic competence. When such systems are damaged or destroyed, the impact extends beyond the immediate loss. It forces reallocations, exposes vulnerabilities, and invites scrutiny. While Ukraine was reshaping the battlefield narrative, Trump was reshaping the political one. In speeches and interviews, he emphasized burden sharing, questioned the scale of U.S. assistance, and suggested that continued support was contingent rather than automatic. These remarks were amplified globally, not because Trump held office, but because of the real possibility that he could return to it. For allies and adversaries alike, the prospect of a shift in U.S. policy is not hypothetical. It is a factor to be weighed now. From Moscow's perspective, this convergence is unsettling. Putin has long sought to exploit divisions within Western societies. His strategy assumes that democratic systems, subject to elections and internal debate, are less capable of sustaining long wars than centralized regimes. Trump's rhetoric appears, at least superficially, to validate that assumption. At the same time, Ukraine's actions undermine another pillar of Putin's thinking, that Russia's strategic depth provides insulation from decisive blows.
Who then holds power in this moment? Militarily, Russia still commands significant resources. Its population, industrial base, and stockpiles exceed Ukraine's. It retains the ability to inflict damage and prolong the conflict. Politically, Putin maintains firm control over domestic institutions, with limited space for dissent. Yet power is not absolute. Ukraine has demonstrated that it can impose costs and shape narratives. Its power lies in adaptability, international legitimacy, and the ability to align its actions with broader principles of sovereignty and self-defense. The United States remains pivotal. Even the perception of wavering support has tangible effects. European governments watch Washington closely, calibrating their own policies accordingly. Financial markets, defense planners, and diplomatic actors all factor U.S. signals into their calculations. Trump, by virtue of his prominence, exerts influence regardless of formal authority. His statements can reassure some audiences and alarm others, creating ripples that reach Kyiv and Moscow alike. Contradictions are evident when comparing official statements to outcomes. Russian leaders insist that their military campaign is proceeding according to plan, yet repeated Ukrainian strikes challenge that narrative. Western leaders emphasize steadfast support for Ukraine, yet debates over funding and fatigue reveal underlying tensions. Trump speaks of quick solutions, yet offers few details consistent with established diplomatic realities. These gaps do not imply bad faith, but they highlight the distance between rhetoric and complexity. Accountability in this environment is uneven. In Russia, state media limits scrutiny of military setbacks, and political accountability is tightly controlled. In Ukraine, greater openness exists, but operational secrecy constrains disclosure. In the United States, policy debates are public and often partisan, shaped by electoral incentives as much as strategic analysis. International institutions have limited capacity to enforce accountability in real time, leaving much judgment to history. For ordinary people, the stakes are concrete. In Ukraine, the ability to strike Russian infrastructure can translate into fewer missiles launched at cities, fewer power outages, and greater psychological resilience. In Russia, awareness of vulnerability can produce anxiety and lead to increased security measures that affect daily life. In the United States and Europe, the war influences energy prices, defense budgets, and political discourse. Taxpayers, voters, and consumers all feel indirect effects. The humanitarian dimension should not be overlooked. Prolonged conflict strains societies, displaces populations, and diverts resources from social needs. Decisions made in Kyiv, Moscow, and Washington reverberate through households far removed from the front lines. When political leaders frame choices as abstract strategy, they risk obscuring these human costs. Media framing plays a decisive role in shaping perception. Ukrainian and sympathetic outlets emphasize resilience and ingenuity. Russian state media stresses continuity and external threats. In the United States, coverage often mirrors domestic political divides, with support for Ukraine intersecting with broader debates about foreign policy and national priorities. International media attempt balance, but face challenges in conveying nuance amid competing narratives. What is often underplayed is uncertainty, the acknowledgement of what is not yet known. Comparing domestic and international framing revealed divergent priorities. Ukrainian audiences focus on survival and justice. Russian audiences are shielded from full acknowledgement of setbacks. American audiences filter the war through lenses of partisanship and historical experience. These differences matter because they shape the political space in which leaders operate. Looking ahead, without venturing into speculation, certain plausible implications emerge. Ukraine's willingness to conduct bold operations suggests a continued emphasis on asymmetric strategies. Russia may respond by dispersing assets and increasing defensive measures at additional cost. The debate within the United States over long-term support is likely to intensify as elections approach, regardless of outcome. Alliances will continue to adapt, balancing deterrence with risk management. For global stability, the intersection of battlefield initiative and political uncertainty underscores a broader truth. Modern conflicts are fought simultaneously in physical and informational domains. Assumptions about permanence and predictability are increasingly fragile. When those assumptions are challenged, power dynamics shift. As this analysis comes to a close, it returns to the question of accountability and institutions. Putin's war was built on confidence in control, depth, and endurance. Ukraine's recent Gambit has tested that confidence. Trump's political impact tests assumptions about the continuity of Western policy. Neither factor alone determines the outcome of the war, but together they expose its vulnerabilities. The lesson here is not that outcomes are predetermined, but that moments matter. Wars do not turn only on battles or elections, but on intersections where military reality and political signaling collide. In such moments, clarity, evidence, and restraint are essential. Understanding the gap between image and reality is not merely an academic exercise, it is a civic responsibility in a world where decisions made by a few can shape the lives of many.